Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining this talk on effective organizations and that take care of people. My name is Paola. I direct the Gender Equality Program in HIP, and I'm really happy to share this experience with you about what we have learned by supporting organizations. HIP is an organization that provides funding for organizations, but that also works a lot and makes great efforts to build the capacity of organizations. And undoubtedly, along this journey, we have learned and we have reflected along with these organizations on different aspects, especially one which has made us reflect very much and learn very much and get so much experience. I'm talking about how to take care of ourselves within organizations and how this care means so much for the sustainability of organizations. So that is our objective for today. I will now give the floor to my colleague Marcela, who will also introduce herself. Thank you, Paula. My name is Marcela Buso. I am an associate of the Gender Equality Program, and as Paola was saying, we are very excited to share with you what we have learned during our work. We want to say that we are not necessarily the experts or psychologists or specialists in self care. However, in the work that we do, by bringing together organizations and working with capacity building, we have worked on self care and we realize that that is a more and more pressing need. That is right. And we would like to say that at the end of the day, taking care of oneself is different for every organization in terms of practices and experiences. It's different for every context. So that's why we want to open up this dialogue with you. And we want to know whether you can identify with what we are going to say here. Maybe you have some other perspectives. I think that everything will be a good contribution. And really, each organization, each context is different, and we have heard some reflections that we want to share with you. However, we want to hear you. That's very important for us, and we want to nurture this conversation with your experiences. So please, if you have anything to say, if you have comments, just let us know. You can type that on the chat, and we will keep an eye on that so that we can have a more open conversation, a rich conversation. All right, so I will share our presentation. Can you see it? You can move on to the next slide. Great. First of all, we would like to reflect on what it means to take care of oneself. As I was saying before, HEEP has realized that taking care of ourselves is essential, that self care is really, really essential. I feel like lately people talk so much about that, but we need to really take the time to reflect on what that is, right? So when we say self-care or taking care of yourselves, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Please don't be shy. You can comment on the chat. We can have that conversation. I know it can be a little strange by using technology, but do let us know what is that for you? What is self-care and taking care of oneself? It looks like we have a shy audience, but hopefully, as we move along, you will feel free to write your thoughts here. We believe that self care has many different aspects, and we have tried to address this subject by recognizing our own vulnerability. We realize that our vulnerabilities are also those of other people and other organizations. We face similar situations and similar risks. And we certainly share some of the ways in which we face this vulnerability. I don't know if there is like one single definition of self care, but we did find one which we thought was relevant. This is a definition coined by our partners from Jazz. They say that this is a political tool that allows to maintain not only activism as a driver for social transformation, but also life, physical, mental, and emotional health, and of course, human rights. We liked this definition because we think it reflects self care in the context of what we do. That is to say, taking care of the movement so that the movement can continue, so that we can maintain the rights for which we work. And for that, we need to take care of ourselves first. There are different levels when it comes to self care: personal, organizational, and collective. At a personal level, we can ask ourselves, what actions are we taking to take care of ourselves physically and emotionally? That can be, taking a vacation or following a healthy diet or working out. In terms of the organization, we refer to institutional policies inside our organizations whose aim is to take care of the physical and emotional health while taking care of the organization. That can be explicit and implicit practices, right? If you have written self care policies, that doesn't mean that they are being implemented or the other way around. So it's important to actually put them into practice. And collectively speaking, well, these are the practices that we do as a movement to hear one another and to support one another. There are mainly two things to prevent when it comes to self care: disease and risk. When we talk about disease or illness, that means what happens inside our bodies when we have too much work. Like we can, maybe be depressed or be anxious. And then there is risk that we are at risk sometimes because of the nature of our work. So it can be both security risks and disease. So what has HIP done? As I was saying, we have reflected on how to strengthen our partners. We realize that having these self care spaces is really important. The work that we do today and that sense of urgency or emergency that we live in, I feel that's more and more true, right? Like we're living in an emergency status, and that can lead to depression or health problems or anxiety. And we know that, yeah. However, sometimes we don't take the time to just take a break and think of how to work on our well-being. He reflected on that, and we realized that it was important to promote these spaces in our work. Just to mention an example, we had personal meetings before the pandemic, right, over a year ago. But when we have that kind of in-person meetings, right, physical meetings, we take some time to ask how we're doing, to acknowledge our emotions and our fears. And we also have some other things like meditation sessions or yoga sessions. And oftentimes our colleagues tell us that they think this is very valuable because they don't find that kind of opportunity on a daily basis. We have also used virtual spaces for self care. Just to mention a couple of examples, a few months ago, we had a call with a partner and they were telling us what self care policies they were implementing internally. They shared with us what had worked, for example. We will tell you a bit more about that later. But this exchange is also a priority for us. Also, last year, at the end of the year, we had a virtual meeting with some partners just to, discuss how we were doing after such a challenging year. This was an opportunity to acknowledge both our vulnerabilities and fears and our accomplishments, right? Like the pandemic has had an impact on many different levels. We understand that people have lost family members or colleagues, and we know that violence has increased and risks have increased. So that was a space to share and recognize where we are, acknowledge that, look at ourselves in the mirror, and feel that sense of community. We also made a collection of good practices. I don't know if I should say good practices, but we made some sort of a compendium of practices done by organizations in terms of institutional policies for self care. And actually, during this call, we were talking to a couple of consultants who were talking about capacity building and self care. And we realized that over the past 18 months, having self care policies has been key for organizations, especially in the past year. Self care became a priority, pretty much a survival method to take care of ourselves. We have realized this is now a priority, and the organizations we work with are implementing more and more self care policies. We have also contributed to the sustainability of organizations, focusing on the difficulties posed by COVID with flexible funds and emergency funds. This has allowed organizations to respond rapidly to the emergency and to allocate resources where they are most needed. Over the past year, we have realized that some organizations, for example, have been able to hire psychologists to help their team, to improve health in the office. And sometimes it's as simple as being able to guarantee that the people we work with will have a salary. That is very, very important. We think that is a priority. And in HIP, we have to promote this dialogue, and we do. We try to foster these conversations with partners and donors to make them realize how important it is to have flexible funds. We think that is really important for the development of organizations. And we have had emotional support as well, especially over the past year for obvious reasons. We have partnered with Child Parenthood, with CAMI, with Fondo Semillas for self care and emotional support. And my colleague Pau will discuss further what we have learned. Thank you, Marce. Let me share my screen. Can you see it? Yes. I think you can see all of it. You can see all the slides. Okay, I think that's it. All right, thank you. As Marce was saying, there are more and more strengthening organizations, donors who are working so that organizations can have that collective care. And last year, because of the pandemic, we partnered with Planned Parenthood, Fondo Semillas, and CAMI so that we could provide these emotional support spaces in light of the emergency situations the health crisis and the health of the people working for these organizations. This strategy took place from August to September last year. There were three processes. This was the third one because we realized that organizations had a huge need to participate in this type of processes. It was addressed to Central American human rights defenders. I mean, defenders who work in Central America, mainly from Mexico, but also from Guatemala, Honduras, Argentina, and other countries. And there were 159 people who participated in this process, and there were several groups. Every group, 3 to 10 people, with 5 sessions, with expert psychologists who were there for support, emotional support, and just sharing some techniques that I will also share with you later, which are helpful to deal with the pandemic, but especially talking about how uh, difficult it is to work defending human rights, meaning that it can lead to exhaustion. And of course, we were focusing on some cases that required more individual attention. So, which were the objectives? First of all, we needed to identify stress levels. We know that human rights and working with organizations and human rights implies some sort of fatigue because we are in touch with vulnerability, we are in touch with strong social issues, and that can take a toll on our health. So, we were really interested in finding out how people were doing because of that, on top of the whole context brought about by the pandemic. We really wanted to create safe spaces to really heal, share, and have that emotional support about what was going on, identifying existing resources and knowledge within organizations too, so that that could be shared with other organizations and have better support. And of course, the creation of support networks was our third objective, to be able to share with peers what was going on, right? Like maybe myself in Mexico with my organization, well, I have this particular context, and I think maybe this is just specific to me, but who knows? Maybe someone else from a different country could be living the same thing. So this is about sharing, about feeling identified and heard in different places. So I think that's very useful to heal or at least to feel more supported in these processes. There were several spaces made available during this process. We wanted facilitators to be expert psychologists who had a psychosocial approach, who knew how to deal with this emotional support, and who were familiar with what organizations do on a daily basis. We identified these important points: validation of emotions, of course, psychoeducational processes to handle stress, and also to handle mourning. So that was at the end of 2020. The pandemic had hit the Americas hard, and in some organizations, people uh, had COVID, maybe even deaths in organizations. So of course there was grief and mourning, and maybe there were not enough spaces to express all of that, and just being able to handle different resources to work that. I mean, being able to work on that with support, that was really good. There was also active listening. Many people said that they didn't even have this type of space, right? Just to talk or to express themselves. We also shared some techniques to handle stress and to have some support in pain, and to also recognize the existing resources and knowledge and share them because that can be useful for other people. We use some techniques such as drawing, painting, writing poems, just motion, storytelling, and even rituals and games. We know that we need a lot of creativity to feel that proximity even at a distance, right? Even when we can't do that in person, we can feel supported throughout these processes. Now, what are the situations that we found during this support? Before doing this whole process, we did a questionnaire to identify the needs of people, to find out how they were doing emotionally. And we realized there was a lot of physical and emotional pain because people had lost family members because of COVID or they had gotten COVID. So that is really hard for people who defend human rights and organizations. We found a lot of stress and tension because of how overwhelming online activities were. So there was like a really big will to adapt to these new ways to get in touch with people and to pursue our programs. But that adaptation brought about lots of stress, and that was also a burden for our work. People also mentioned that they had more responsibility at work and that there were some issues when it came to uh, the dynamics at work because sometimes it's hard to solve problems even in person, right? And now, if on top of that you add this new reality, which implies developing new communication skills, and of course, in these processes, there are also some problems in the dynamics and the relationships. We have to say that and we have to address that. Many people also mentioned that the working hours also increased in terms of taking care of the family and housework, right? Everybody's working at home, and that's a whole different thing for those of us who have children, especially for women, because usually women have an extra burden because of all of the gender stereotypes and because of the social construct related to women. So we do see that it was even more work for them in terms of housework and taking care of the family. Many organizations also said that there was not enough access to the health system because of budget issues, for example. Not everybody working for an organization is part of the payroll, and maybe they don't have access to the health system. So it's really important to talk about that and offer alternatives so that, in spite of these difficulties, organizations and people working for them can access healthcare. Now, there is something that we really liked and that we saw throughout the process, that was empathy by participants, to support one another and listen to one another. I think that facilitating these groups is the first step, really, but processes are developed by people who participate in them. And we did see a lot of will to listen, to support, and to share throughout these processes. Just some important information that we thought we should maybe mention because they are alarming. Well, at the beginning of this process, 12% of participants, that is to say, 12% out of the 159 folks that I said participated, told us that they had had some suicidal ideas. Of course, that really caught our attention. That confirms the need to create these spaces, to constantly have these mental health care and physical health care spaces for the team. Another important figure is that 88% of participants are women. So that also shows that more women participate in organizations and in these processes. These are some of the results that we found at the beginning and at the end of these processes. As you can see here, the blue line is the first line, the initial one, and the orange one is the final one, right? Pre and post. So we did see a decrease in some of the difficulties among participants, especially in terms of anguish, sadness, and loneliness. It was a short process, 5 sessions. It helped a lot, and that's what we wanted to share. These spaces are really an important, effective mechanism for people to feel more supported and for them to find other resources to take care of their emotional health. And lastly, I would like to share some lessons learned that we had throughout this process. First of all, how important it is to incorporate into our work that psychosocial support, appropriate organizational support too. As we said, every organization is different with different dynamics. However, it is really important to always take into account these approaches to have a holistic care for everybody participating in the organization. It is also important to conduct these processes with a gender approach. We know that the consequences of these whole wear and tear of these processes are different for men and women. We need to understand that. That is necessary for all these processes. Another important thing is the experience of the therapists working in the defense of human rights and supporting victims. Many organizations are making efforts to develop methodologies and appropriate support for organizations. And I think it's really important to get close to these organizations so that they can support us in these caring processes. It was also important to strengthen organizational leadership. Not only those who are leading organizations like directors or coordinators whose workload is really significant, but also training new leaderships, right, for that generational relay, if you will, to have more participation and collaboration in organizations so that we can all take care of ourselves. So these were the lessons learned, or the most significant lessons learned from this process. We thought it was very interesting to share that, and we think that this process really helps us see how people are doing right now. Of course, as I was saying, this is added to fatigue and the need for support that we saw even before. Do you have any questions? Do you have any comments? Maybe Marce, maybe you want to say something while I change the presentation?
Yeah, Marcela, so over here, there's a comment over here from Ros Munoz. Being vulnerable, accepting that I'm not a superwoman and communicate that. And the result is that I felt very protected by my team. Thanks, Beatriz, for reading that. And thanks, Rox, for texting it. And yes, totally agree. I don't know if it's a fear, but this fear of showing ourselves vulnerable or not showing it, it's also something very stressful to all of us. And yes, saying this and saying that we don't know everything about all and that we cannot handle everything, it's very valid and necessary as well. Yes, I think that the first step is that to realize that and I think it's a bit complex when we accompany the processes of other people. It's complicated to see that we're also people that we feel that we wear out, that it's important to start from there so that we can take care of ourselves. So we can continue. So besides all these, and as Marcela was saying, in this path we have accompanying other organizations, we've been able to do some reflections that we want to share with you. Of course, well, there are many practices that help so that we can promote and keep these self-care practices. We want to share them with you and wrap up with that. But it's also important to talk about those things that happen within organizations that sometimes we do not call them, or that sometimes do not add anything to the self-care actions of people within organizations and all these movements. And we want to talk about that next. And the first one is this highlighting or underscore of sacrifice to bring the cause over our own health. And yeah, we think on these in two main ways. First of all, from the organization itself. Sometimes the organization has some demands or requests, like you should be working full with us, or adopting like these attitudes or behaviors that come from being very productive, from capitalism, of making more, or responding all the time, of being present all the time because the cause requires us, because this is a moment where we have to do that. Of course, there are moments that we that are, well, are key, and mainly for the ones that are on political advocacy, or where they accompany vulnerable populations. But it's always important to prioritize the care of the ones that are handling or in work of these organizations. And this also, this underscoring of sacrifice, like sometimes we have this idea like we're a superwoman, or that the cause is more important than me, or we need to be all the time here present so that I can reach the goals that we've set to ourselves, and we leave aside the ways that we feel, so we leave it behind, and there's a point where we feel very, very tired and burnt out. Yes, and I would also like to add, I remember that someone participating in this process that Pau just mentioned said, and I got goosebumps, because it was the first time that I'm at the core and my emotions are at the core, because all my life I have struggled and fought for the cause of my organization, and I work 24/7, including weekends. Like, they put all their effort in the cause, and they do it with all this goodwill. But she said that it's the first time that I realized that I have feelings. And then they asked me, what do you like doing? And I don't know what I like doing, because I'm working all the time. To me, that was a very strong revelation. That happens very frequently, but we see it more when we work with organizations, because people that work at organizations are also there because they're moved by something. They want to participate. They want to be part of that organization. There's a salary, but there's also an emotional salary. And there's something that moves us to work, and that cause or that struggle, and that of course can take us to these difficult and dangerous ways where we lose ourselves, where we lose our health, and well, we are very, very exhausted and burnt out by that. We also wanted to share the something about the clarity and theory and operations on human rights, and that's not necessarily translated into congruent organizational practices. Maybe an organization brings the approach of gender perspective, and they bring it perfectly well to their programs through their different actions at work with the population. But this is not necessarily something that means that the organization, with their own practices, is including this gender perspective. So that's why it is important to realize this and to take it into account, so that we can build the mechanisms and question, and to know if our practices, if our work, if our own policies are being congruent with what we are doing and promoting within our organization. And this is not translated just like in paper to say, okay, yes, I have all these policies, but it's also for the organizational culture, if this is being a reality or not. And this is something that we have to question all the time in order to know if it's that way. And we also have to develop skills so that we can do these. And there's also the need of leadership, of participating in leaderships, as we said it in this process. Uh, uh, we've also seen that leaders are worn out, and it's also important to have these spaces so that from leaderships we can encourage this culture of self-care. If leaders are all the time in this organization sending messages at 10, well, it's the dynamic that we're doing. This is what's happening in the organization. So we think that they are the ones that are more committed with their own self-care, and to spread it in all the other practices and in the culture of the organization. So this is a very important thing that we should take into account. We also saw that human rights work is romantic, and that we normalize this violence inside organizations. And yeah, solving problems is always a problem. And if we have this clarity and the theory, or if we work in an efficient way with other populations, does not mean that inside the organization we're doing it like that. Or sometimes even we invisibilize some practices that are happening within the organization because of all the work that we're doing. So that's why it is important to have all these spaces to be honest and to talk about the things that are happening, and also to raise our voices when there are violent dynamics, or when we have some practices that are violating human rights of people within the organizations. We have to talk about this. We have to be more we have to have more conversations. We have to be able to bring this to the table and to find mechanisms to manage all these things. Of course, the need of creating attention protocols and clear action mechanisms. And well, as I said this earlier, paper does not make or makes it this is a reality, but it's important that everyone in an organization know what to do, where to go, how to raise our voice when there's a situation like this, so that we can work on it. People are the ones that make organizations and not the processes. But well, that does not mean that we should not have those processes in place, that we have all these mechanisms in place. And building them requires a lot of effort and participation of the organization as a whole. But it's also a way of protecting the ones that participate in all this. We've also observed that economic struggles for providing all the benefits does not justify that rights are violated. Maybe some organizations, because of economic reasons, it's complex for them to hire full-time people or to have a full-time staff, or because of their payroll. I don't know how you name this in other countries, but to have all the legal benefits. And this is not a justification for the organization not to have the right efforts, or to be violating other rights, such as severances, or pay, or Christmas bonuses, or these kind of things. We should have all improvements and that are fully aligned to work rights and to human rights as well. And finally, but not least, the nonviolent solution of conflict, and to have personal and collective spaces. And that is, conflicts happen in all human relationships, and the difference is how we face them and which are the tools that we have for facing these problems. And there could be a great will inside organizations to face them, but we do require processes to build skills, build communication and mediation skills, in order to face all this conflict in a non-violent way. As I mentioned, there are organizations, people that are experts in developing and accompanying these processes with organizations. And well, it is important to ask for help of people that can accompany in all these processes. Well, and now we want to wrap up this conversation and to share some specific actions that we have detected that are being implemented in our organizations. For instance, starting by the first one that we have in the list, to have days, working days of 8 hours and days of extra time. And yes, as Pao was saying, that we are there because we love the cause, and we're in practices where we're not that strict in fulfilling these hours, these work hours. And sometimes because of the situation we cannot do so, but there's always a possibility of having extra days or some other practices that do not make us wear out, because yeah, that we get this tiredness of work. Also, to have the dignified working conditions, to have a salary, all the benefits, social security. We do know that it is a challenge, and we've spoken about this, that we cannot uh, be in a payroll in here in Mexico, for instance, or to pay all the benefits. But of course, there are some other mechanisms that can help us compensate all these things. So yeah, that also is part of a self-care. Also, to have a workspace that's nice, safe, and appropriate. And well, this is an abstract kind of concept, but if we have a nice work environment, if we feel comfortable working where we are, well, that is also a way of taking care. And it's the same thing with space, having clean offices, dignified offices. We don't have to have like huge offices, but we do need to have a proper space for working with the minimum requirements. Then having also policies for problem solving. As Pau said, we have to have them in paper. It's important to write them down, but it's not the only thing that's important. But we have to implement them, and we have to have the capacity of solving problems in a fair way in the right moment, so that conflicts do not last longer or that they grow bigger, but that there should be a right solution of problems that is also fair. We've also seen a practice that's being adopted by more organizations, or at least that's what we've seen, where they've said that they have this need in their own organizations. It's providing support and emotional contention for the whole team, and we do this through different ways. We've seen organizations that do this in a group, and this is also a mechanism for strengthening and making the team stronger. But we also have people offering this kind of support individually. But well, in this last year, what I've seen with organizations, with the ones that we've worked from the gender equity division, where we see this need, and organizations are assigning more resources in their budget to that. And well, we also have to have maternity and paternity leave policies, to have time for being dads and moms. That's very important, to take the time to be parents, to enjoy our maternity. That's an important thing as well. And it's the same thing when we're sick or free days. Sometimes we don't even give ourselves time to be sick, or well, not to be sick, but to heal. Sometimes we have a flu and we just say, okay, this is a flu, no problem, I'm going to work. And no, that's not the case. We have to take our team to heal, and we have to take our team to take care of people, the people that we live with, and to take care of the people we love as well. And then we have detected an additional practice by other organizations. It's closing their offices once or twice per year. Sometimes we go on vacation, and then after vacation, you're already thinking like, oh, I have all these things pending. How many emails am I getting? I'm going to be full of work. So the fact of closing offices and having no one working, not even your boss, no one working at all on the office, that also makes you disconnect at a different level. But we do think that this is a very good practice. We know that it's not always possible. Mainly organizations that work on attention, the violations of human rights never stop. But there are some organizations that have their job, and they are allowed to do so. Some of them have implemented this. And then also assigning resources for self-care, and to do that intentionally in any practice. hiring or having additional help for emotional contention, or to sit down with and create policies of problem solving situations, but we have very careful with self-care. Also, to put in place security protocols, that's very important. um, and mainly for human rights advocates to have all these security protocols in place. It's highly important because we feel safe and secure, we reduce risks, and we take care of ourselves. And also to have this flexibility, this hour flexibility, so that we can do things. I mean, we are people, we also have pending issues, we have to do other things like take going to a medical appointment, like doing other things at home. So it's also important to have this flexibility with hours and not to feel judged because you ask for time to take a diligence or to do something, or to take all this time just because you need it. And I want to wrap up by saying that these are not specific recommendations or it's a list that you have to follow for self care. These are just some practices that we have detected that some organizations implement. And we know that all organizations are different and the work that's done by each of them and their contexts are different. But well, these are some practices that could also be used for internal reflection. So thanks very much. Well, are there any questions, thoughts, comments, anything else you want to add? Well, I would probably like to add this vision of self care that Marcela shared at first, where it's self care is also a political thing. And I do agree with that. Yeah, mainly now at this time where there's a priority to being productive, where success is measured on the salary you earn or the work you have, or if you're someone that's working day in and day out, so then you're super productive and then you're super successful. So that has a very strong value. And politically speaking, it's a position that my priority is me. I prioritize myself because this is a human right. And this has consequences in the way that we see how we uh, bring our own relationships and our position in the world. So, yeah, we have to take into account that. And I guess you're all shy here. We don't have comments. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes there are some practices that we have in the organization. I mean, we can have I don't know, maybe self care policies, but there are some practices that even if we don't tell them, they're part of the organizational culture, and this could be good or bad, or it could be affecting our own self care, like being all the time working outside our working hours, or not having all these spaces for saying how we feel, or what are the things that we get from working online all the time. I mean, just these questions, having these moments of sharing our own humanity, our feelings. I think that that leads to something different in the dynamic of our relationships. Yeah, they're saying here it's a very important what you're saying of closing offices like a couple of times in the year, sometimes during the year. It's a very helpful thing. Yes, from HEAP, this is a policy that we started implementing the previous year, I guess. And yeah, it's very helpful to clear out. Yeah. Yeah, it's a different level of disconnection. Yeah, because as Marcia says, you come back and you have thousands of emails, or if they need you for whatever, then they call you, and it's very complicated to disconnect. And well, yes, I'd like to add that self care has different levels, and at a personal level, yeah, we have to be very intentional in seeking these spaces. And when it comes to the organization, I do think that it's a very conscious decision implementing practices within the organization, no matter how small they are. And I do think that this starts by acknowledging our humanity and our own vulnerability. Yeah, that, and there's also something important that's defending our own spaces, like saying which are the spaces that make us feel okay, whatever that we like being, like if we whether we like exercising or we like art, and to hold on to it, because that requires a lot of discipline and control, personal control, will, our personal will, but even to defend ourselves this and to give a priority to these self-care spaces and to these health spaces as well. Yeah, they're also asking, when these policies don't depend from us, what can we do to promote these type of practices? That is a very interesting question. And I think that it's linked to what you said of strengthening leadership. Yeah, there is a responsibility of the ones that take these sessions of institutional development to have spaces so that we can understand what's going on in our organization, to share things that are going on, and to do something about it. I do believe that it is a responsibility that has to be assumed by the ones that are in charge of the organization. This need of including it, because sometimes it's hard to talk about it, or it's also hard to have a change if we are not in a position where we can take these decisions. So yeah, maybe to find spaces so that we can express this, and well, to promote that this is done. But it's a responsibility that's important that we take from all these leaderships, these awareness that it has to be a crossing a crossing decision. Okay, yes, Pau, and I'd like to add something. It's important for donors to promote these conversations with all the organizations that are supporting here, because yeah, we have to emphasize the importance of looking after people, of looking after the organization, of being careful of these costs. Yeah, absolutely. So if we don't have any other questions, we might close it here. Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for all the ones that connected today. We're always learning and sharing from you all the experiences that we have from HEAP. And hopefully this will help you keep reflecting and questioning some practices that we've had, or some changes that we can have in order to improve and to be all healthy in our organizations. And of course, this should be translated into more sustainability of our movements. Thanks very much, Paola and Marcela, for sharing all your knowledge about this very important topic. And mainly, and while we don't talk about it that much, or that we're just starting this dialogue inside organizations. Thanks very much. And we are still here on the summit. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye. So long. Bye bye.